All right, this is our last official chapter. This is parasitic protozoa, helminths, and arthropod vectors. So parasitology, this is the idea of the study of parasites. So protozoan and helminth parasites that exist worldwide, that's what this field of microbiology encompasses. This occurs among people in rural, undeveloped, and overdeveloped areas. Emerging diseases are a serious threat in our developing nations. And parasitic infections often involve several hosts. There'll be the definitive host that we'll talk about and the intermediate host. And then parasites can infect humans in one of three ways. They can either be through ingestion, like something that you eat or drink, vector-borne transmission, so an insect, or direct contact, like physical touching or sex. So looking at the major routes at which humans acquire parasitic infections. So it's showing you those different ideas and the different infections that you can get through each of those routes. So let's talk a little bit about arthropod vectors. Vectors, as we've talked about in the past, are animals that carry microbial pathogens. And so arthropods are common vectors. And we talked about that several chapters ago. Some arthropods are considered biological vectors. They actually serve as a host for the pathogens that they transmit. So some of them are mechanical vectors, meaning they just carry the pathogen, but they don't have it. They're not part of the actual life cycle. They're just carrying it from one individual to the next. Disease vectors belong in two classes of arthropods, the arachnidia and the insecta. So let's look at some protozoan parasites of humans. And as you'll remember, protozoa are unicellular eukaryotes. So these are not bacteria. These are eukaryotic cells. They have all of the compartmentalized organelles, all of that sort of stuff that we talked about briefly several chapters ago. Protozoa that enter the body via ingestion have two morphological forms. There's the trophozoite, which is the feeding and reproducing stage that lives within the host, and there's the cyst, which is the infective form that survives in the environment. They undergo excystement when ingested, developing into trophozoites. So trophozoites undergo encystment before leaving the host in typically in waste material or feces. Parasites classically are grouped by their mode of locomotion. So we'll be talking about the ciliates, the amoeba, the flagellates, and the apicomplexans. The ciliates are protozoa that use cilia in their trophozoite stage. So if you remember, you might have looked at a paramecium underneath of a microscope somewhere along the way. And they have those little hair-like extensions all around their body. Those are called the cilia. And those cilia beat and help to move the protozoan. Bacillium coli is the only ciliate known to cause disease in humans. It's commonly found in the intestinal tract of animals. Humans become infected by food or water that's contaminated with fecal material from one of those animals that contains the cysts. So trophozoites attach to the mucosal epithelial lining in the intestine, and the infections are generally asymptomatic in a healthy adult. Bacillitis occurs in individuals with poor health. They have persistent diarrhea, abdominal pain, and weight loss. Severe infections may produce dysentery and ulceration of the intestinal mucosa. The presence of the trophozoites in stool is diagnostic for this disease. The infections are treated with antibacterial agents like tetracycline that alters the normal microbiota of the digestive tract. The small intestine becomes unsuitable for the ciliate, and the prevention of this particular condition relies on good personal hygiene and proper water sanitation. Amoeba. So these are protozoan with no truly defined shape. They just look like a blob. They move through their pseudopods. So if you remember, we briefly talked about the idea of what was called cytoplasmic streaming, where they push their cytoplasm against the inside of their plasma membrane, and it produces these arm-like structures that we call pseudopods. They're found in water sources throughout the world, and there are a few of these that cause diseases. Entamoeba histolytica is carried asymptomatically in the digestive tract of humans. Carriers are predominantly found in less developed countries. There is no animal reservoir in this particular condition. The infection most commonly occurs by drinking contaminated water, and encystment occurs in the small intestine. The trophozoites migrate to the large intestine. So there's 3 types of disease that can result from an infection of these type of amoeba. The luminal version is asymptomatic infection in healthy individuals. Invasive amoebic dysentery, which causes severe diarrhea, colitis, appendicitis, and ulceration of the intestinal mucosa, and invasive extraintestinal amoebiasis, where the trophozoites in the blood are carried through the body. Amoebic dysentery and the invasive form can both be fatal. So here's what a cyst of an Entamoeba histolytica in a fecal smear looks like under a light microscope. These are diagnosed based on the identification of cysts or trophozoites from stool samples or intestinal biopsies. Asymptomatic infections are treated with paromomycin, and symptomatic amoebaisis is treated with itoquinolin. Oral rehydration therapy often is coupled with drug treatment, and maintaining clean water is important in prevention of this disease. All right, acanthamoeba and Naegleria. These cause rare and usually fatal brain disorders or brain infections. These are common in habits of natural and artificial water systems, and individuals who wash their contact lenses with tap water can become infected. So this is why you use saline solution. Acanthamoeba, it enters through cuts, scrapes, conjunctiva, or inhalation. Keratitis occurs when the trophozoites invade the eye. And then amoebic encephalitis is the more common disease that's caused by this. It causes a headache, altered mental state, neurological defects, and eventually death. Naegleria is what enters through this when swimmers inhale contaminated water. Amoebic meningoencephalitis may result. That causes hemorrhage, coma, and usually death. These 2 conditions are diagnosed by the identification of the trophozoites in clinical samples. Keratitis can be treated with anti-inflammatory drugs. The amoebic encephalitis is treated with 2 specific different antibiotics, and then the amoebic meningoencephalitis has a specific antibiotic that is treated with. Brain infections are often diagnosed too late for treatment. Prevention of this is difficult since these organisms are environmentally hardy. So swimming pools and devices that use water should be routinely cleaned. The flagellates, these are protozoan that have at least 1 flagella. So remember when we looked at flagella, there's a lot of different ways for your flagella to be arranged. You can have just 1 on one end, you can have 1 on either end, or you can have them all over the body of the organism. The number and the arrangement of the flagella helps to determine the species. There is specific testing for this once you know you have a flagellated species. Trypanosome cruzi. This causes Chagas disease, which is endemic in Central and South America. Possums and armadillos are the primary reservoir for this. Transmission occurs through a bite of an insect in the genus Triatoma. Kissing bugs feed preferentially from blood vessels in the lips, and this is how it's transmitted to humans. So these bugs come out at night and they bite near your lips where your lips are red because you have a lot more blood vessels in that particular area. And so they know to go to that area and they bite there. And when they bite there and draw blood, they transmit this disease. So it's showing you the life cycle of this particular condition. So this condition actually is now found in Florida as well. All right, the 4 stages of Chagas disease. There's an acute stage that is characterized by chagomas. There's a generalized stage, then there's an asymptomatic chronic stage, and then finally there's a symptomatic stage that's characterized by congestive heart failure, followed by the following the formation of pseudocysts. Trypanosoma-induced heart disease is a leading cause of death in Latin America. So there's what the trypanosomes look like. The little purple squiggly line that looks like a worm, well, it is kind of a worm. That's the trypanosome in a red blood cell smear. Identification is through the tryphomagogotes or their antigens in a clinical specimen. Xenodiagnosis is an alternative diagnostic method, but I don't believe we do this anywhere in the United States, where we have uninfected kissing bugs that are allowed to feed on the individual, and then the presence of the parasite in the bug after 5 weeks or 4 weeks is indicative that the individual is infected. Early Chagas has antibiotics that are used to treat it. The late stages cannot be treated. Prevention involves limited contact with these particular bugs. Then there's Trypanosoma brucei. This causes a disease called African sleeping sickness, and the insect vector here is the tsetse fly. So various animals serve as reservoirs. There are two different variants of this. One variant is found only in Western Africa, and then there is a second variant that occurs in Eastern and Southern Africa. Humans are infected when they're bitten by infected tsetse flies. So there is the life cycle of Trypanosoma brucei. The life cycle is for brucei is different than the life cycle for cruzi in several ways. The brucei matures in the salivary glands of the tsetse fly. The tsetse fly directly injects the Trypanosoma brucei into the individual, and then that lives outside of the host cells. African sleeping sickness has 3 stages. If it's left untreated, the site of the fly bite becomes a lesion of dead tissue. Parasites in the blood trigger fever, lymph node swelling, and headaches, and then they are diagnosed with meningoencephalitis. Death can occur within a few months of the disease onset. All infections are characterized by cyclical waves of parasitemia. The host immune system is unable to clear the infection. Trypanosoma brucei constantly changes its surface glycoprotein, so it's very hard to treat. The presence of the trypanosomes in clinical specimens is diagnostic. African sleeping sickness is 100% fatal if it's left untreated. The early stages are treated with specific drugs. The central nervous system infections are treated with another specific drug. The clearing of the tsetse fly habitats help to reduce the disease causes. The release of sterile male tsetse flies has helped to eradicate the flies in some regions, and personal insecticides, netting, and long clothing help to reduce insect feeding. Leishmania. This causes leishmaniasis. That's hard to say. It's endemic in parts of the tropics and the subtropics. Wild and domestic dogs and small rodents are commonly the hosts. Leishmania has 2 developmental stages: that the amastogotes, which multiply in the host macrophages and monocytes, and promastogotes, which develop extracellularly within the vector's gut. So here's the life cycle of Leishmania. There's 3 clinical forms of this disease. There's a cutaneous version that causes painless skin ulcers around the bite that occurred. The mucocutaneous version, which skin abrasions enlarge to encompass a mucous membrane of the mouth and nose or the soft palate. And then the visceral version, where the macrophages carry the parasite to the liver, the spleen, the bone marrow, and the lymph nodes. In this case, it's fatal 95% of the time, untreated. So showing you a picture of what happens when it becomes mucocutaneous leishmaniasis. The identification of the trypanosomes in the patient's samples is how we diagnose this. Immunoassays can confirm the diagnosis. Most cases are of cutaneous and mucocutaneous, heal without any treatment. The visceral version is treated with antibiotics. Prevention is limited to reducing exposure to the reservoir and the vectors. Giardia, so Giardia intestinalis is the causative agent of giardialysis. It's a common gastrointestinal disease in the United States. The individual ingests cysts through contaminated food, water, or off of their hands. Giardia ranges from asymptomatic infection to gastrointestinal diseases. Some of the symptoms include diarrhea, pain, bloating, nausea, vomiting, and fever. Trichomonas vaginalis is the most common protozoan causing human disease in industrialized nations. It lives in the genital urinary system of men and women. It's transmitted almost exclusively via sex, and it occurs in people with pre-existing STDs or multiple sexual partners. This increases the risk of HIV transmission. In women, it results in vaginosis, which causes an odorous discharge, not odorless, but odorous discharge, vaginal and cervical lesions, abdominal pain, and painful urination and intercourse. Infection in men, unfortunately, is typically asymptomatic. The presence of the trophozoites in vaginal or urethral secretions is how we diagnose this. Infections are treated with a certain class of drugs, and prevention involves abstinence and safe sex. So here's what these little guys look like in Trichomonas vaginalis underneath of a light microscope. They kind of look like horseshoe crabs. The apicomplexans, the alveolite protozoa, these are infective. The infective form is characterized by complex organelles at their apical end. Sorry, so apical means pointed. These are parasites of animals. The life cycle involves at least two stages or two types of hosts. Schizogeny is the major feature of an acomplexian life cycle. It has multinucleated schizots that form before the cells divide. An example of this is Plasmodium, the causative agent of malaria. So there are 4 species that cause most of the infections. There is Falciparum, there's Vivex, there's Ovale, and there's Malariae. Then there is another one that has become an emerging human pathogen, Knowlesi. Malaria is endemic throughout the tropics and subtropics. The Anopheles mosquitoes are the vectors for Plasmodium. The Plasmodium life cycle has 3 prominent stages. Plasmodium possesses numerous virulence factors that help it to infect individuals. The parasite can be hidden from immune surveillance by going into the red blood cells or the erythrocytes. Malaria secretome is what is releasing toxins and enzymes into the host. There are adhesions that the Plasmodium has that helps the parasite to avoid clearance from the spleen. Merozoites avoid immune cells in the liver. Some species form a dormant stage called a hyphozoite, and they have this ability to induce the bite me signal in humans, which causes mosquitoes to bite that individual when they're infected so they can pass it to the next individual. Genetic traits increase malaria resistance in endemic areas. One of them in particular is sickle cell trait. So sickle cell is an interesting disease because there's 2 forms of it. So if you get 2 copies of the gene for sickle cell, then you have sickle cell anemia. But if you only get 1 copy of the gene, so you now have what's called sickle cell trait, and you don't display any of the symptoms of sickle cell, but you are immune to malaria. So what is a particularly devastating disease in individuals in the United States started out and is still considered a genetic benefit if you only have 1 copy of it and you live in a malaria-prone area. Hemoglobin C is another thing that gives resistance to malaria. Deficiency of glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase is another, and the lack of Duffy antigens on the erythrocyte. So all of those are genetic traits that help individuals resist having malaria. Symptoms of malaria are associated with the cycles of the erythrocyte lysis. So what malaria does is cause your erythrocytes or your red blood cells to split. And so the symptoms that you see of this are cyclical. They include fever, chills, diarrhea, and headache. The erythrocyte loss causes anemia, weakness, and fatigue. Falciparum is what causes a serious disease called black water fever. Death of brain tissue can be fatal within 24 hours. The immunity develops in victims that survive the acute stage. This is diagnosed based on identification of the protozoa in a blood smear. Anti-malarial drugs, there's a bunch of them now. There used to only be one, and that was quinine, but now there's a whole bunch of them, so chloroquine and so on. The control of malaria requires limiting contact with mosquitoes. So this means eliminating standing water. That helps to reduce the places where mosquitoes can breed. The use of insecticides and netting helps to prevent mosquito bites. Individuals traveling to endemic areas can take preventative medications to avoid infection. Toxoplasma. So T. gondii is the causative agent of toxoplasmosis. This is one of the most widely distributed worldwide parasites. Wild and domestic mammals and birds are major reservoirs. Cats are the definitive host. The infection is due to the consumption of undercooked meat that contains the parasite, and ingestion or inhalation of contaminated soil can also occur. So again, cats are the definitive host here. So if you've ever looked at the side of a container of cat litter, it specifically says that women that are pregnant or suspect that they are pregnant should not handle used cat litter. And the reason is because this is how they can end up with this condition, and it can be detrimental to their unborn baby. Most infections of Toxoplasma are asymptomatic. Toxoplasmosis develops in a small number of people. You have a fever with some other symptoms. It's usually a self-limiting infection. Toxoplasmosis is more severe in two populations: HIV/AIDS patients, and as I just mentioned, a fetus. Transplacental transfer of the protozoan can cause abortion, stillbirth, and various birth defects. So that's why we have to be really careful about changing cat boxes when you are pregnant. So there's what it looks like under the light microscope. Serology is the most important diagnostic method for this particular condition. Asymptomatic infections require no treatment. If you have a symptomatic infection, there are specific drugs that will treat that. The prevention is by cooking the meat and avoiding contaminated soil. And again, pregnant women are advised to avoid cat feces and litter boxes. Cryptosporidium parvum. This is a causative agent of Cryptosporidium enteritis. It was once thought to only infect livestock and poultry, but we now know that humans can carry the parasite asymptomatically. Infection usually results from drinking contaminated water. You can also get it through the fecal-oral transmission route. It causes severe diarrhea accompanied by headache, muscle pain, cramping, and fluid and weight loss. This is a chronic disease is an indicator in HIV-positive individuals that have AIDS. So there is what it looks like underneath of a light microscope. There are many diagnostic techniques that cannot detect cryptosporidium. The oocysts are detected by microscopic examination or use of fluorescent labeled antibodies. There are drugs that are available along with oral rehydration therapy. Prevention is filtration of drinking water to remove the oocysts, and good personal hygiene helps to prevent the fecal-oral transmission route. All right, the Cyclospora catenacensis. This causes the emerging disease Cyclosporidus. This is a waterborne apicomplexon. The infection occurs from ingesting contaminated food or water. There was an outbreak most recently contributed to raspberries in Central and South America. The environmental reservoir is unknown. Again, this is an emerging disease. So there you have the life cycle for Cyclospora. All right, symptoms include cramps, watery diarrhea, myalgia, which is muscle pain, and fever. AIDS patients can experience more severe disease. DNA probes are used to detect Cyclospora in patient samples. There are drugs to treat this, and thoroughly washing fruits and vegetables can help prevent infection. So this is a nice summary chart. It gives you the name of the organism, the primary disease that it causes, the geographical distribution of it, how it's transmitted, and what the host organisms are. So a nice way to take our ciliates, our amoebas, our flagellates, and the continued flagellates and the apicomplexans, and sort of summarize them. So our next topic is going to be helminth parasites of humans. So helminths are macroscopic multicellular eukaryotic worms. Their life cycles are complex. They need an intermediate host to support the larval stage. The adult worms can either be dioecious or monoecious. Dioecious means there's two separate sexes. Monoecious means that there's just one sex between the two. The individual can be both sexes. And there's three groups of helminths that we talk about: the cestodes, the trematodes, and the nematodes. The cestodes, these are commonly called tapeworms. So they're a flat segmented intestinal parasite that looks like a ribbon. All tapeworms lack digestive systems, and they all possess the same general body plan. They look like a big long flat ribbon. So there they are, their ribbony self. And so they are made of individual segments that are called a proglottid. And within that proglottid, you have eggs. So there's taking a look at some other things. So this is the head piece that they're showing you in the blow up over on the right. And so they don't have a true head like we think of with another animal, but they have this head piece, and it consists of a scolex, which is the head area, and then it has all of these hooks, and it also has a sucker, because these are going to attach to the inside of the digestive lining and basically just suck in all of the digested food an individual is consuming. So here's the generalized life cycle of some tapeworms of humans. So you have to consume the infected meat that has the cysts that's undercooked, and then you get them in your muscles, and then and those migrate to your intestine. You pass them out and on to the next person. All right, Tania. Tania signata is a beef tapeworm, and Tania solium is the beef tapeworm. So cattle and swine serve as the intermediate host of these two diseases. Humans that live in close contact with their livestock or with inadequate sewage treatment have a high incidence of infection. The adults attach to the intestinal epithelium. Most individuals shed the stroblia without any symptoms. The intestinal blockage can occur, however, if the tapeworm is too large. Diagnosis is based on the identification of the proglottids in fecal samples. There is a drug for this, an anti-helminth that treats this, and prevention relies on proper cooking or freezing of meat. So this is what it looks like when they get into your muscle and form those cysts. So all those white slashes you see in the thigh muscles there are the cysts of this particular tapeworm. Echinococcus. This is the canine tapeworm. So this is probably the one that you're going to be interested in. So canines are infected by eating the cystoceri in various herbivore hosts. Humans are the accidental intermediate hosts. They consume water or food that has been contaminated with dog feces. It causes hydatid disease. The larvae travel through the body and form hydatid cysts. The symptoms follow enlargement of the cysts in the infected tissues. Diagnosis for this is through immunoassay and visualization of the cyst. It's treated with anti-helminth drugs and surgical removal of the cysts, and the prevention of this is good hygiene. So there is a cyst, unfortunately, in someone's brain. Trematodes are commonly called flukes. These are flat, leaf-shaped worms that lack a complete digestive tract. They attach to host tissue via a ventral sucker to obtain their nutrients. The geographical distribution is limited because the intermediate host is limited. They are grouped according to the site in the body where they parasitize. So this is just what an adult fluke looks like. So it has a mouth and it has suckers, and it has looks kind of like a leaf. This is the life cycle of the 3 different types of human flukes. So let's look at the liver fluke first. So Fasciola hepatica and Fasciola gigantica. These infect sheep and cattle worldwide. Humans are the accidental definitive hosts. They ingest the Mariceridium from aquatic vegetation. The chronic infection occurs when flukes reside in the bile duct. So that's where they ultimately migrate to. They get to the bile duct in the uh, gallbladder and liver, and that's where they cause their problems, hence the name hepatica. The symptoms coincide with episodes of bile duct obstruction and inflammation. Diagnosis is based on the presence of eggs in the feces and symptoms. The treatment is using a particular anti-helminth. All right, blood flukes. So schistosoma. These are dioecious blood flukes, meaning that there is a male and a female, and they are the causative agent of schistosomosis. Most cases of this occur in sub-Saharan Africa. There are 3 geographically limited species that infect humans: Masonii, Hematobium, and Japonicum. Humans are the principal definitive host for schistosoma. The immature schistosoma are called the cercariae, and they burrow through the skin of humans who have come in contact with contaminated water. So that larvae is going to mature and mate in the circulatory system. The eggs move into the intestines or the urinary bladder and the ureters. Swimmer's itch may develop at the site of the entry of this blood fluke. Infections become chronic and can be fatal. So here's what the eggs look like. All right, diagnosis of this is based on the identification of spiny eggs in stool or urine samples. You can also use immunological assays if the eggs are not detected. There is a treatment for this, and prevention relies on improved sanitation and avoiding contaminated water. Now let's talk about nematodes. So these are commonly called roundworms. These are long cylindrical worms that taper on each end. They possess a complete digestive system, and they have a protective outer cuticle that protects them. These are parasites of almost all vertebrates. Some of the features of the life cycle of roundworms. They have a number of reproductive strategies that include intestinal nematodes that shed eggs into the lumen of the intestine, and then those eggs are consumed in contaminated water or food by the next individual. The larvae of some of the intestinal nematodes are going to be able to hatch into the soil, and the larvae actively penetrate the skin of a host. Some nematodes insist in muscle tissue, and then we consume raw or undercooked meat, and that is how we end up with it. Mosquitoes transmit a few species of filarial nematodes. The adult sexually mature stages are found only in the definitive host, the final host. All right, Ascaris lumbicoides. This is endemic in the rural southeastern United States. It is the most common nematode infection in humans worldwide. The eggs are ingested in water or on vegetables, particularly root vegetables. Adult worms grow and reproduce in the small intestine. Most symptoms are asymptomatic, but if they have symptoms, there'll be abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, and intestinal obstruction when the worm burden becomes too high. So there's what they look like. Diagnosis is based on the identification of eggs in stool or larvae in the sputum. Rarely, the adult worms may be identified in stool, or they can be identified when exiting the mouth or the nose. The treatment is a particular medication, anti-helminth medication. Intestinal obstruction can require surgery. Proper sanitation and hygiene are important for prevention. Hookworms are the second most common nematode infection. There are two different species that infect humans. The larvae are able to burrow through the skin, and they travel to the heart, the lungs, and eventually the small intestine. Adult worms are going to suck blood of their host, and they cause chronic anemia and protein deficiencies. Ground itch occurs at the site of larvae penetration. So there is what a hookworm looks like. Diagnosis is based on the presence of anemia, identification of eggs and blood in the stool. There are anti-helminths specific to treat nematodes. Proper sanitation is essential for prevention, and wearing shoes in endemic areas may prevent exposure. So if you have ever heard your mom say, put your shoes on, you're going to get a hookworm in certain areas, particularly the southeast, unfortunately, they're endemic. And so if you're walking around outside barefoot, you already have a little cut or lesion on your foot, and you step on a hookworm, they can manage their way into your skin that way. Enterobius vermicularis. This is commonly known as pinworm. This is the most common parasitic worm found in the United States. Humans are the only host for this. Female pinworms deposit their eggs in the anus. The symptoms: infections can be asymptomatic. Intense perianal itching occurs if they are symptomatic. The identification of the eggs or the adult worms is diagnostic. The treatment is some specific anti-helminths for this. We prevent spreading from individual diseases by making sure we have good sanitation, and that helps to limit diseases. Pinworm runs rampant in daycares, unfortunately, sometimes. Here's what the eggs look like. Anisacus simplex. Humans are the accidental host in this. This is caused by by consuming raw or undercooked fish that is infected. Um, they have a complex life cycle with several larval stages. They're showing you the life cycle of Anisacus. Infections are typically asymptomatic. Some individuals develop allergies to the worms. Diagnosis is based on endoscopic identification of the worms in the intestines. So when they're doing an endoscopy, they can take a look and see them in there. The treatment is removing the worms from the intestine, and prevention involves avoiding raw or undercooked marine fish. Wuchereria bancrofti. This is a filarial nematode that infects the lymphatic system. Infections occur throughout the tropics. It's transmitted by the female Culex and Anopheles mosquitoes. The mosquitoes ingest microfilariae when feeding on humans. The mosquitoes then transmit the parasite to a new individual. It remains asymptomatic for years. Lymphatic drainage can result in elephantiasis. So here is what it looks like underneath of a microscope. And there's what elephantiasis looks like. So it literally blocks the lymph node, and the lymph nodes are carrying fluid that has escaped your circulatory system back to your heart. And so your lymphatic system is a very important system when it comes to returning fluids. And if it's blocked, it causes major swelling like this. Diagnosis is made by identification of the microfilariae in the blood. There is a drug to treat this. Prevention relies on avoiding infected mosquitoes. So we have a couple of pages of our helminth diseases like we had for the others. So again, lists there are cestodes or tapeworms, the trematodes or flukes. It tells you the individual organism, what diseases it causes, where you find this disease, the mode of transmission, and The length of the adult worms, which I think is kind of an interesting thing, just to look at. Some of them can be 25 meters long, so some of them are really, really long. So you got 2 pages of this. This one's all your roundworms. So nice summary charts to help you manage these different diseases. That is the official end of the lecture series. It's been my pleasure to present all of this to you. I'm sorry we had to end on worms. That's kind of disgusting, but nonetheless, it's an important topic. And I will see you soon. Bye.